Good morning. Today we are going to discuss in this fourth lecture on research methodology the nature of an argument. So basically in this lecture we will discuss what an argument is all about. It is important for us to understand what an argument is because in every research paper there will be a series of arguments that the author makes in order to justify the claim that he or she makes. So when you write your own research paper, it is very important that you know to present arguments that are valid. I'll come back to that in a moment, what I mean by a valid argument. So if these arguments collectively would lead you to justify, in other words, to give reasons for the claim that you make. Justification basically means you have some reasons to say why you say what you say, and those reasons are given in the form of an argument. In whichever discipline you do research, this is important. You need to know to give good arguments. So normally even in everyday communication, when you may say something, people ask you, why do you say that? Obviously you need to give reasoning, and those reasons are in the form of arguments that cannot be easily refuted. In other words, it should be strong enough or valid enough that others cannot find fault with your argument, so that your claim holds. So this is the most important thing about an important aspect about research method. So now today let us begin with the idea what an argument is in the first place. Before that, we are going to discuss there are two types of arguments. You will do this much better when you do logic. You will be probably doing in a detailed way, but my purpose is not to give you everything about it, only that which helps you in doing a research. I am picking and choosing some ideas from the logic so that you could make use of that when you are actually involved in the research. One is called the deductive argument. Now, deductive argument basically means you have support or justification for the conclusion you make or the claim that you make, and that support is very conclusive or decisive. It cannot be refuted. So that would be a deductive argument. I give a simple example. This is commonly used in philosophy. All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. And this is a typical example of a deductive argument. Normally, a deductive argument begins from something general to something particular. We begin with something general. What is the general premise? All human beings are mortal. So that is a general thing. It speaks about every human being, all of us. So that is why it is a general statement that refers to every one of us, you, me, and all the human beings. Then the next statement is Socrates is a human being. That is referring to a particular human being by name Socrates. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Why? Because all human beings are mortal. That is a general statement that you make about human beings in general. Then from that you are deducing to particular person, namely Socrates. Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. So when you are deducing something from general to particular, that would be known as a deductive argument, because you are deducing your conclusion from general thing to a particular thing. Normally in a deductive argument, your conclusion is supported by a very conclusive, supported in a conclusive way. In other words, it cannot easily be refuted. In this case, you cannot refute this conclusion that Socrates is mortal, because logically it would be impossible for you to refute it, because logically it is a valid argument. I'll come back to that in a moment. What is that valid argument? Inductive, it only gives a probable support to your conclusion. It is not definite support, only probable. Normally, inductive is used in science. You begin from something particular and then you move to general. From individual instances, you make a conclusion about the general experience. One example could be, now that is not exactly science, it's a pseudoscience, but still I can give that as an example for you to understand. I see today the sun rising in the east. Scientifically it is incorrect, because sun doesn't rise anyway. But my experience, at least, I see today sun rising in the east. Yesterday I saw the same. Day before yesterday I saw the same. And ever since I am conscious human being, that is my experience. So therefore, if sun rises every day in the east, then sun rises always in the east. So from my particular experience, I am making a general conclusion. Now this is only probable. Why it is probable? I don't know, because tomorrow the sun may decide to rise in the west. I do not know. Therefore only it is probable. That is why today we say science can never claim certainty. It can only claim probability. It may say we have 6 sigma certainty, which means 99.99999%. It may be right. There is still possibility of 0.00001% wrong. That's the idea. So it's a probable theory, but close to certainty, but not certain enough, because it is relying on induction. And therefore it can only give probable support to the conclusion. Now, note the word probable is important, because probable is not the same as possible. Probable has a greater extent of assurance, whereas possible, it's possible mean also it's impossible. So probable is a very strong word compared to possible. So it's a probable support to the conclusion. So these are the two types of arguments. So when somebody writes, first identify what type of argument is that. Is the person moving from a general claim to something, applying it to a particular thing, then it is deductive. If a person moves from individual experiences to something more general, then it is inductive. There, of course, your support is only probable. And oftentimes, it can be also a weaker argument. I will come back to that in a moment. Now, let us look at these sentences that you see on the screen. Now, some of them are basically an argument, an assertion. Others are not. An argument has both conclusion and premises. Now, premises are those statements which logically related to one another lead to a conclusion. Now, a conclusion is basically an assertion that something is or is not the case. A conclusion can be said to be true or false. It is the case or it is not the case. So, for example, if there is a dark cloud, it will rain. There is a dark cloud, therefore it rains. Now, the conclusion, it rains, is a conclusion. Now, you can say it to be true or false. You can actually check and verify, no, it doesn't rain. So, or you check and see, well, it rains. So, a conclusion is always an assertion. A conclusion cannot be a question. A conclusion cannot be a command. It is always an assertion, a statement which affirms something to be the case or negates something. Now, what are premises? Premises are supportive statements. They are the reasons. The reasons by which you arrive at the conclusion or the claim Now, the premises could involve sometimes expert opinion, scientific evidence, and relevant examples. We are not going to look at so much about the details of each of these premises, but let us look at the sentences we have right below. I want you to have a look at that. Some sentences are assertions, some are not. So I want you to identify which sentences are assertions and which sentences are not assertions. Because a conclusion or a claim can only be an assertion. I'll read the sentence. The ship sailed on the wind-tossed sea. Assertion or not assertion? I feel hungry. Assertion or not assertion? Don't talk to me ever again. Assertion or not assertion? Is suicide immoral? Assertion or not assertion? Lying is wrong. 2 plus 2 equals 4. A circle is not a square. Now, if you have identified 3 and 4 are not assertions, then you are right. All others are assertions. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7 are assertions. Because they are simple statements which can be verified to be true or false. The ship sailed on the wind-tossed sea. You can verify whether it is true or false. So therefore, it is an assertion. I feel hungry. Well, you can verify that. Don't talk to me ever again. No. That is merely a statement of command or a request, and that cannot be said to be true or false. It is not an assertion. It is not claiming something to be the case or not the case. Is suicide immoral? It is merely a question. It is not affirming something or denying something. So 3 and 4, they are not assertions. So when you look for the claim or the conclusion, you have to make sure it is always an assertion. Unless otherwise, it is a rhetorical question. Sometimes some authors have a very highly sophisticated way of writing. Instead of making it an assertive statement, they may raise it as a rhetorical question by which they imply they are affirming something. So that is a literary genre that depends on your ability to follow that kind of language, and you normally get a wind of it when we get used to reading such literature. Let me now give you a few more examples. I have 3 sentences here. I want you to distinguish which passage is argumentative and which passage is non-argumentative. An argumentative passage would have premises and conclusion. So try and identify whether each of these passages that you have right before you have premises and conclusion. I will read those passages for you. The first one is capital punishment is morally permissible because it helps deter crime. Deter means avoid. So capital punishment is morally permissible because it helps deter crime. The second, if John killed James in self-defense, he did not commit murder. He did act in self-defense. Therefore, he did not commit murder. Third passage. The number of abortions performed in this country is increasing. More and more women say that they favor greater access to abortion. This is an outrage. Now, at least one of these passages is not an argumentative passage. It doesn't have premises and conclusions. They have totally unrelated statements. You need a little sharp mind to get it correctly. Well, I will give you the answer. The first two passages are argumentative. They have premises and conclusions. The last one does not have. There is no conclusion there. They are making some statements. The number of abortions performed in this country is increasing. That is one statement. More and more women say that they favor greater access to abortion is another statement. This is an outrage. You are merely asserting that you feel angry about it. There is no argument there. Because your anger is just a way by which you are saying that I don't agree with these statements. That's all. An argument is not whether you agree or disagree. An argument should flow logically from the relation between the premises. Like in the first example, the one premise is kind of is hidden or implicit. Now let us put it this way. Capital punishment helps deter crime. That is one premise. The second premise, whatever helps deter crime is morally permissible. That is implicit there, that premise. Therefore, capital punishment is morally permissible. I am putting in a syllogistic form. You don't find somebody writing always in the syllogistic form. People simply write like this: capital punishment is morally permissible because it helps deter crime. They are given a reason, it helps deter crime. But there is an implicit statement there: whatever helps deter crime is morally permissible. So that is implicit, that is hidden, that is understandable. Let us take the second one. There you have got two premises and a conclusion. Normally you should have more than one premise. It may not be always evident, it may be implicit, you must be able to identify that. In this case, you have got both premises are explicit and therefore you have a conclusion. The conclusion is very clear. Therefore he did not. You see, whenever you have a word like therefore, you know it's a conclusion. So it's important that you look for the indicators for conclusion and premises. If John killed James in self-defense, he did not commit murder. That is the first premise. He did act in self-defense. Therefore, he did not commit murder. So, in other words, John had killed James, obviously. So, the question is, if he had done it in self-defense, then it is not a murder. He did act in self-defense, therefore it is not a murder. A murder is something that is intentionally done to kill someone. Killing can be accidental. You know, by mistake you are lifting a sword to practice, and somebody unexpectedly came right barging in front of you. You happen to chop off his head. You did not intend to kill him, therefore it is not a murder. That's the difference between the word to kill and to murder someone. Murder is meditated, premeditated, planned and executed. So if this is done with an intention, there are certain actions not done intentionally. So killing is, all killing is not necessarily a murder. Some killings are murder because you have planned it, you have intended it. Some killing, it happens by accident. So that is the difference between killing and murder. In this case, of course, John killed James, but if he killed it in self-defense, it is not a murder. And he did it in self-defense, therefore it is not a murder. So there is an argument there because those two premises are related and they lead to the conclusion. So therefore the third one is not an argumentative passage because there is really no argument. You got two sentences, but they are not logically related to one another to lead to the conclusion. So you may sometimes find these kind of statements, and you yourself may be writing these kind of statements in your research paper. So then you are not making an argument, you are merely saying you are angry with the situation. You are not even explaining why you are angry. You are saying the abortion number is increasing, women favor abortion, I am angry. Now, why are you angry? At least you have to make an argument why you are angry. Then it becomes an argument. You are not making any argument here whatsoever. Sometimes people wrongly associate this as an argument and they have very wrong way of writing paper this way. And if you look at your own paper, very often you will find such kind of, sweeping statements like this, which is not a helpful thing. So I'm helping you to understand what is really an argument, what is not an argument. An argument would have premises and conclusion. Premises basically are the supporting reasons, right? And they are normally related to one another and they logically lead to conclusion. Now, if you are a little sharp, smart, is there a difference between the first argument and the second argument? There is already one difference I pointed out in the first argumentative passage. One of the premises is implicit, it is not explicitly there, only one is explicit, but we can infer it. That is one difference. But is there any other difference? Can you associate with the two types of argument I said? One is deductive, another is inductive. Why? There is a general statement, whatever helps deter crime is morally permissible. In other words, all that helps you to deter crime, avoid crime is morally permissible. That's a general statement. Capital punishment helps you to deter crime. Therefore, capital punishment is morally permissible. It's a deductive statement. You are deducing something particular from something general. In the second case, you are not making a deductive argument. You are making an inductive argument. If John killed James in self-defense, then he did not commit murder. It is about a particular case about John killing James. If he did it in self-defense, then he did not commit murder. And then you are saying he did act in self-defense, therefore he did not commit murder. Here it is inductive statement. In fact, it has certain empirical dimension to it because you are verifying it that he did not act in self-defense. So the first, it is purely logical relation in the first argumentative passage. In the second, there is also a certain aspect of you actually verifying it and saying no, he did act in self-defense. So you are like a eyewitness to that. You have seen that. So there is some empirical dimension. Empirical means you have the knowledge through your own external senses. So it is not merely a logical coordination that has led to this conclusion, that you have eyewitness, something of empirical justification. And it is inductive because it is about a particular case, if John killed James. And oftentimes inductive arguments have this conditional clause. If, then. If you put it in a symbolic form, if P is the letter P in English, then Q, again the letter Q. The P can be replaced in this case, John killed James in self-defense. Q is he did not commit murder. So this is the same pattern, it will be there. If P, then Q. He did act in self-defense. What it is? P. Therefore, he did not commit murder. Therefore, Q. If P, then Q, it is P, therefore it is Q. Simple is a structure I am trying to give you. This is what they do in symbolic logic. They put symbols instead of the actual statements. You can use the same structure and you can simply replace the value of P and the value of Q. It will be the same. The result will be the same. So I have helped you now to distinguish an argumentative passage from non-argumentative passage. It is important that when you read a literature, you also look whether the person is really making an argument or simply making sweeping statements like in the third passage that we have here. It can be persuasive, but it is not argumentative. It can appeal to your emotion, but it doesn't really make any reasonable argument there. So when you write a paper also, it is important that you cannot merely appeal to the emotions of people. You have to give reasonable arguments. Now let us come to this distinction between valid and invalid. I have two kinds of syllogism here. The first is valid. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. I gave this example a while ago. This is a valid thing, because you begin with the general assertion that all men are mortal, and you say then Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. The invalid would be the first premise and the second premise are totally unrelated. Now in this case, the first premise and the second premise are related. All ducks are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Absolutely it is invalid, because the first premise and the second premise are totally unrelated. That makes it an invalid argument. Now, what is a valid argument? It has to be having basically true premises in form and not in content. Okay, now let me explain what is this form and content. It is not necessary that the content is true. It is not necessary that all men are mortal is true from the content point of view. Or it is not even necessary that Socrates is a man from the content point of view. Maybe Socrates is not a man. That doesn't matter. What matters in the form, in the structural form, this argument has true premises. In other words, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. Formal point of view, from the point of view of structure, they are true. Not necessarily from the point of view of the content. That is what it means by true premises in form and not content. So when there are true premises in form, then the conclusion follows inexorably from the premises. This is a mere logical connection. That is why it is the form which is true, not so much the content. Now I will give you another example. This is commonly said about it. God is love. Love is blind. Therefore, God is blind. It's a valid argument. Why? Because the premises are true in form. Because logically they are related. God is love. Love is blind. Therefore, God is blind. Not from the content point of view. We are not looking at the content. Well, obviously God is not blind. If you look at it from the content point of view, then you would say no. But we are looking purely from the form point of view. That's why it's called the formal. From the form of the structure of the sentence, they are true. Okay, they are related here. Therefore, it would be still considered a valid argument. Of course, we can also find whether there are fallacies there. I am not coming to that quickly. There is an error in that reasoning. But without looking into any of those things, when you look at the form, it's very valid. But what would be an argument which is not only true in premises but also true in content? You call that a sound argument. So yeah, an argument need not be only valid, but it also needs to be sound. Very many times people make good valid arguments because they are very good in logic, but their content may be totally false. So what is important is for you to not only make a valid argument, it's a necessary condition, of course, but that is not everything. Your argument should be sound if you want to be authentic in your research. If there is a spirit of integrity in your research, then your argument should also be sound, not merely valid. Now, what is the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument? A sound argument is a valid argument, but it goes beyond the validity in the form, it is also true in the content. So that is why it is a sound argument. Normally, valid or invalid arguments are applied to deductive argument, not for inductive argument. So if an argument is sound, then that is the best argument you can give, because it cannot easily be refuted. if an argument is sound argument, because it is based on the deductive argument where you have a conclusive support for the conclusion. It is not merely a probable support for the conclusion. So it is almost irrefutable. Now we have the next one is the idea of now we have this distinction. We have the distinction between valid argument and the invalid argument. And then if an argument is valid in form and true in content, then it is a sound argument. Okay, these are some of the concepts you should be very clear about. There is also a distinction between a strong argument and a weak argument. Now, this is normally used in inductive argument. What is a strong argument? A strong argument is the conclusion is supported probably, not conclusively but probably. A weak argument is a conclusion is not supported even probably. So there is a lack of probable support to the conclusion. That makes the argument weak. In the inductive argument, you don't make a distinction between valid and invalid. You only make a distinction between strong and weak. Strong, because either way, a strong argument also can be refuted because it's only a probable support. Obviously, a weak argument can easily be refuted because there is not even a probable support. Now, this is again in the form. But if a strong argument with true premises is a cogent argument, if the premises are true, I mean from the content point of view, then it is a cogent argument. So now at least I have used 6 different terminologies. I have used valid argument, invalid argument, then sound argument. So these belong to one group. It all belongs to the deductive argument. A valid argument is where the form is valid or form is true, and then it leads to the conclusion. Invalid argument, the form itself is invalid. They are two unrelated statements. Well, from the point of view of when the content of a valid argument is true, then it becomes a sound argument. Now that is about the deductive argument. In the inductive argument, you have either a strong argument, that means you have a probable support to the conclusion, or you have a weak argument, you don't have a probable support to the conclusion, and a strong argument, which means an argument which gives probable support to the conclusion if it is true in its content, the premises are true, then it is a cogent argument. So these 6 different terms, something you should be very familiar. You might use a cogent argument in your thesis, or many of the research papers would write, will come up with a cogent argument, especially when you are doing something on a social sciences or natural sciences. Most of your arguments will be cogent argument. You cannot expect you to give a sound argument there because your support can only be probable. Because it is still possibility, as I told you, 0.0001% of error possible. So it will be still a cogent argument, which is good enough. So either in your research paper, if it has to be well received, you should make either strong arguments or at least cogent arguments, depending on the discipline. Mostly in social sciences or natural sciences, you would have cogent argument because it relies very much on your sense knowledge, your external sense knowledge. So obviously, you would be having cogent argument. Okay, now this is the structure of this, strong argument or a weak argument. How do you know something is a strong argument or a weak argument? I am giving the symbolic form here, so we can replace with any kind of value for P and Q. If P, then Q. P, therefore Q. Now, let us replace the values of P and Q with something factual or with something we can experience. If there is a dark cloud, then it rains. there is a dark cloud, therefore it rains. You can replace the P and Q with anything. For example, if I fall sick, I will not come for class. I have fallen sick, therefore I have not come for class. Anything. If you come late, I will not admit you in the class. You came late, therefore I did not admit you in the class. So it's very simple. You can replace the P and Q with anything of the factual reality. This is obviously a strong argument. It is not a weak argument. Why? In a structure like this, in the first premise, if P then Q, there are two values, P and Q, right? Now the first value P technically is called antecedent. That which happens first. That is why it is antecedent. Q is a consequent. That which comes as a consequence, that comes second. So if P then Q, the P stands for the antecedent, that which happens first, antecedent. That which comes before, that's what it means. Then Q is a consequent. So P, therefore Q. So if you are affirming the antecedent, then it is a strong argument. If P then Q, I affirm the antecedent P. By affirming the antecedent, I draw the conclusion, therefore Q, then it is a strong argument. This is called affirming the antecedent. In Latin, you call this modus ponens. Don't worry about the Latin word. Okay, it's good to know, but it basically means affirming the antecedent. If the structure is affirming the antecedent, in other words, the second premise affirms the antecedent, then it is a strong argument. That's why I given the tick mark there. That's a right argument. That is a strong argument. Let us look at another form of this. If P, then Q. Not Q, therefore not P. What am I doing here? Am I affirming the antecedent? In the second premise, in the first case, I affirmed the antecedent. Let me take again the same example. If I fall sick, I will not come for class. Right? Not Q. So the Q is here already, I will not come for class, therefore it is negative. Therefore when I say not Q, I have come for class. It becomes positive, right? Not Q here becomes positive because the Q was a negative one. I will not come for class. Or let me put it this way, I will be absent for class, to make it simple. If P, then Q. If I fall sick, I will be absent for class. Not Q, I am not absent from the class. Therefore not P. Therefore I have not fallen sick. It's a strong argument. This is called denying the consequent. Because you see, the second premise denies the consequent, denies the Q value. If P, then Q, not Q. The example I gave you, if I fall sick, I will be absent from class. I am not absent from class, therefore I have not fallen sick. This is again a strong argument. This is called modus tollens. That means denying the consequent. Don't worry about the Latin again. You need to remember, however, affirming the antecedent and denying the consequent in the second premise make an inductive argument, strong argument. This is a strong argument. Let us look at what makes it a weak argument. Exactly the opposite of it. So if you are very smart, you would have figured it out by now. If P, then Q, not P, therefore not Q. This is a weak argument. Let us take the same example. If I fall sick, I will be absent from the class. I have not fallen sick, therefore I am not absent from the class. This is a weak argument. Why? There is a lack of probable support to the conclusion. The fact that I am the only reason why I will not be not be absent from class is not only falling sick. What happens, suppose if I slipped and fell on the way to come to class? That's a possibility. So by denying the antecedent, you cannot logically deny the consequent. True, I am not sick. Therefore, does not guarantee that I will not be absent from class. See, I could be absent from class because for various reasons. So this is only a weak argument. It is still an argument, but a weak argument. So that can be refuted easily. Denying the antecedent is a weak argument. So also, affirming the consequent is a weak argument. If P, then Q. Q, therefore P. Take the same example. If I fall sick, I will be absent from the class. I am absent from the class, therefore I fell sick. No. I could be absent from the class not only because I fall sick, I could be absent from the class for various reasons again. So therefore, this affirming the consequent is again makes the argument weak. What makes an argument in an inductive argument strong is affirming the antecedent and denying the consequent. These two things will make an inductive argument strong. The opposite of it, namely denying the antecedent and affirming the consequent, make it a weak argument. I know I have said so many things, maybe little may sound difficult because I am speaking non-stop also, but it may be important for you to go and look at these slides and give examples and do by yourselves and try to replace the values of P and Q and see, then learn for yourself. That's not be very difficult once you get the wind of it. Now I am going to speak to you about the bad arguments, not all of them, a few of them. What could make an argument bad? In logic, technically we call this fallacy, an error in the argument. A fallacy is basically the mistake that you make in an argument. So the first bad argument is begging the question. What is begging the question? It is fallacy of arguing in a circle. You say the same thing in different words and you think you are making an argument. You are not. In other words, your statement both in the premise and the conclusion is the same. You are not saying anything new, but you think you are saying new. For example, let me give you this example. Students in JDV, regardless of their program of studies, are entitled to make a choice when the subjects are electives. In other words, whatever program you do in JDV, you can choose your electives. So I have put it in a very students in JDV, regardless of their program of studies, are entitled to make a choice when the subjects are electives. Therefore, students, I am sorry, that is not necessarily in JDV, have the right to choose their elective subjects. I am not saying the same thing. I am not making any argument. I am merely repeating what I said in the premise of the conclusion. So there is no argument here, it is only a begging the question. Begging the question basically means arguing in the circular way, saying what is in the premise again in the conclusion. Now, this is something we commonly make this mistake, the fallacy of equivocation. Now, what is equivocation? You use a term in an argument, but you assign two different meanings to the term in the argument. In one place, you use the same term in the premises. In one place, you use that term with one meaning. In another place, you use the term with another meaning. This is a common argument. We must have heard it oftentimes. We make for anti-abortion. A fetus is indisputably human, right? A human is endowed with rights that cannot be invalidated, including a right to life. Therefore, a fetus has a right to life. Well, we all may agree that the fetus has a right to life, but an argument is a bad argument. Why is it a bad argument? The word human in the first sentence and in the second sentence do not have the same meaning. In the first, you are merely referring to its biological aspect, its DNA. A fetus is indefinitely human because it is born of the human DNA, biological point of view. In the second, you are using the word human in the sense of the person or the personhood. Therefore, you have a philosophical meaning, not a biological meaning. A human is endowed with rights that cannot be invalidated, including a right to life. So this is exactly the equivocation. All the time we use this kind of bad arguments. I'm only saying the argument is bad. The conclusion is something that I and you may agree. That's a different story. But you should have the right argument, not a bad argument. Now here the argument is bad. This is called the fallacy of equivocation, because the word human in the first sentence has different meaning and in the second sentence has different meaning, and you just draw a conclusion based on the same term being used in both premises, but unfortunately of different meanings. The third one is appeal to authority. Again, this we often say that, the fallacy of relying on the opinion of someone who is not expert in the specific field. Oftentimes it's like saying, I shouldn't be eating non-veg food. Now, why is that it's not good for health? Why do you say it is not good for health? My mother told me. Is your mother a doctor? Is she a physician? No. So basically what you are doing is, you are appealing to an authority, but an authority who is not expert in that field. You can only appeal to an authority who is expert in a particular field. Is that clear? So that is the mistake that we make. Like for example, if you are quoting somebody from a religious field on matter of science, now that is fallacy, because obviously you are appealing to authority of some person who is not an expert in that field. A religious person can tell you something about religion, not about science, and that's why Einstein beautifully said it, the Bible teaches me how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. So the religious people thought they have the final answer about the science. No, we don't. Religious people don't have. The scientific people don't have final answers about religion either. So you just respect your field and you just don't appeal to appeal to an authority who is not expert in a particular field. So if a claim of a person conflicts with the consensus of the opinion of the experts in that field, then you have to doubt that claim, no matter whatever authority that person has. Also, if experts disagree about the claim that an authority figure makes, you have good reason to doubt it. So these are the two rules of thumb, as they say, to judge whether a person in authority can be taken seriously, especially if the person is not expert in that particular field. Now, slippery slope. Now, this is something that we commonly come across in our life. You have a dubious premises. Dubious means doubtful, unverified premise. You simply have hearsay statement, people saying here and there, you have not verified, no actual study conducted, but it becomes something like everybody says, so almost you take it to be true. The fact that everybody says doesn't make something true. It has to be actually verified. So this is a dubious premise. So you use the dubious premise and argue that a particular action will lead to other actions and result in disaster. So therefore you should not do the first action. So now now let me give you an example that will make it clear. Proliferation of pornography on the internet leads to obsession with pornographic materials. What is the meaning of proliferation? Too much of availability. Okay, there is too much of pornography material available on the internet. That leads people to get obsessed with porn. Obsessed means they are always thinking about it. People are always therefore thinking about pornographic material. Now, these kind of statements you might have heard oftentimes. Now, have you ever checked whether this is doubtful premise or it's a true premise, then it's content obviously. It is not a true premise. No study has ever been conducted. And no way in which people have found out whether there is a relation between too much availability of pornography on the internet and people too much thinking about pornographic materials. That correlation is not shown anywhere by any study. So you are simply using it. These are all statements that we commonly, sweeping statements would we make. So this is a dubious premise. Another dubious premise: obsession with pornographic materials disrupts relationship and it leads to divorce. Again, no study is made that people who think too much about pornography always suffer from relationship problem. No actual study is done. No verification done. So therefore you are building on dubious premises and therefore you say pornography should be banned. Because it is the pornography, proliferation of pornography that has led to all this. Therefore it has to be banned. Now this is a slippery slope. You are just sliding in a slope, and therefore without any way in which you have had evidence about it. Oftentimes we will come across people making such kind of sweeping statements and get away with it. And most of the time politicians do this kind of jigglery, jumla. Faulty analogy. Now sometimes we use a wrong analogy to draw a conclusion. An analogy basically means you are drawing comparisons, a similarity between certain things. Now remember, no analogy can be perfect. Okay, analogy is a kind of a similar model, a similarity you try to show, but it's not the same exactly. And if you use a flawed analogy to argue for a conclusion, it is worse. So two things, the example is, two things are similar in some ways, therefore it also should be similar in other additional ways. Let me give you an example. Human beings feel pain, they care for their young ones, they live in social groups, and they understand research methodology, or they do research. All these things are applicable to human beings. Apes also feel pain. They also care for their young ones, and they also live in social groups. This is analogous. You are comparing. You are seeing the similarity between the humans and apes. That's what is called as an analogy. Therefore, apes can understand research methodology. Now it is a flawed analogy. In some cases, we are alike with the apes. That doesn't mean in every case or in other additional ways we are alike. So you cannot, from certain similarities, you cannot say in every case it is the same. So therefore, this is a wrong thing to say. Apes can understand research methodology. That's a faulty analogy. Appeal to ignorance. This is another thing that oftentimes used in the argument, but is a bad argument. The fallacy of arguing that the absence of evidence entitles us to believe a claim. Now, this is oftentimes used in the abortion debate. Both people who are for abortion use this, and people who are anti-abortion use this. No one has proven that the fetus is not a person, so it is in fact a person. Science has not proven that fetus is not a person, therefore it is in fact a person. Now people who are against abortion use this claim. So we are ignorant about it, therefore my claim must be right. No, that's not a quite correct argument. It's a bad argument. It is obviously false that fetus is a person. In other words, fetus is not a person because science has not proven it to be a person. Now this is said by people who are supporting abortion. So fetus is not a person because science has not shown. So this is also again wrong, because a lack of evidence, science has not shown something to be the case, does not make it not to be the case. Or something, so if science has not shown something to be the case, does not necessarily mean that it is the case. It is the case or it is not the case. So both ways it is appealing to the ignorance. We don't know, it is not proven. Therefore, it ought to be this case or it has to be the opposite case. So that cannot be a right argument. That's a bad argument. Straw man. This we often use in our own, our own circles, and in politics, oftentimes this is used. You deliberately misinterpret somebody's claim, so you can easily refute it. Now, the example I have given here is about John. Now, John, let's say he wants to run for the president of a CEO of a company. Let's say it's a democratically elected. He is running for the post. And then he realizes that there are people from all kinds of faith are working there. So he wants to have a code of ethics for the company, which is not based on any one religion, but it is secular in nature. So he is making a propaganda along those lines. We will promote a secular code of ethics if I become CEO, not by a majority religion and so on. So the opponent gives a speech. John wants us to strip religious faith away from every member of our profession and to banish religion from the realm of ethics. Did John really say that? Did John say that religion has no role in our life or not even in ethics? He didn't say, but you are misinterpreting, because then you can easily refute it. We should not let this happen. We should not have John have this way. Vote against the secular code of ethics. Believe me, oftentimes we do this in our own circles, and politicians do that. We misinterpret others' argument, others' claim, so that we can refute it. I will come back with examples during the discussion. Appeal to the person, ad hominem. This is a fallacy of arguing that a claim should be rejected only because the person who makes it doesn't have good characteristic. That is wrong. You cannot look at who says, whether there is a validity in the argument that is made. This again, we often use that. Oh, who says? This person is talking about it. What right he has? No, it doesn't matter whether he has right or not. If you ask that question, perhaps none of us would have right to speak about anything, because we all are, fallible human beings. But is there a rationality in the argument that the person makes? So appeal to the person. You are, instead of appealing to the reasoning, you are appealing to the person. So that is called ad hominem. Let's give the example. Maria says animals have rights and that we shouldn't use animal products on moral grounds. Don't believe a word of it. She owns a fur coat. Fur coat means it is made of the animal fur. Okay. She is a big hypocrite. Doesn't matter whether she is a hypocrite or she owns a fur coat. Does she make an argument that is convincing that animals have rights? That's what we need to look into, not about the person's characteristics. That would be a bad argument. The last one is a hasty generalization. That doesn't mean these are the only bad arguments possible. I am only giving some of them. These are the most commonly used bad arguments. But I will conclude with this. You draw conclusion about a group of people based on a small sample of the group. You generalize too quickly. You see 2 or 3 people of a particular group doing something wrong, you attribute to the whole group. This is called hasty generalization. The example here is, in this city, 3 pro-life demonstrators. You know the meaning of pro-life demonstrators. Pro-life demonstrators means people who are pro-life, means people who are against abortion. They are called pro-life. Okay. So 3 pro-life demonstrators have been arrested for trespassing or assault. They have been arrested for some assault they have done. I am telling you, pro-lifers are lawbreakers. You see, that's a hasty generalization. There are 3 pro-life people who have done something wrong. So what do? All pro-life people, or who are speaking against abortion, they are against law. They break the law. That is hasty generalization. It's normally built on some prejudices. We always make such hasty generalization about some people or the other. So that's all I have to speak about the argument. We have discussed quite a lot of interesting points, and some of them are really very helpful to us in our understanding of writing a paper, reading literature in the first place, whether there is a good argument, bad argument, valid argument, invalid, whether it is a sound argument or a cogent argument. These things are very helpful, of course. And then when you write your own paper, it helps you to write in a much more convincing way with good arguments, and therefore this distinction that we have made is helpful. With that, I will end the class. Then we'll take up some questions if you have any. Thank you very much.